All right, so we're going to continue with our Howliday Inn. We're on Chapter 7. Good night, sweet Chester. I should have known something was wrong when tears fell on my breakfast. I looked up and saw that Jill was crying. She didn't say a word, but when she caught me looking at her, she burst into a fresh bout of sobbing, shaking her head as if to deny something she knew to be true. She closed my door and moved on to feed the others. I heard her move past Chester's bungalow, and then I called out, "Chester, Chester!" There was only silence. "Chester!" I called again. "Why is Jill crying?" Silence. "Answer me, will you? What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Again, no response. I was beginning to worry, but not so much that I let it stand in the way of breakfast. When I looked up from my food dish, I saw that Jill was going back into the office. I knew it was risky, but I had to find out why Chester wasn't talking to me. I pushed up the latch to my door with my nose and cautiously crept over to Chester's bungalow. A shadow fell across his door, making it hard to see inside. "Chester," I whispered. I strained my ears to pick up a sound, any sound. I thought maybe he was still asleep and I'd hear his breathing or a rustle of movement. "Chester!" I snapped. "Wake up!" But then my eyes adjusted to the shadowy scene before me. I held my breath as I realized the truth. Chester was gone. Immediately, my mind began searching for a logical explanation. He was out investigating, I told myself. He was. But what I saw next stunned me into the realization that not only was Chester gone, he might not be coming back. The bungalow was entirely empty. No food dish, no water dish, no rug on the floor, only a rag of a mouse hanging limply by its neck suggested that the place had once been inhabited. I didn't know what to think then. I stood there, useless as a fire hydrant in a town without dogs, and felt the tears welling up in my eyes. "Oh, Chester," I thought, "why didn't I listen to you? You told me to stay awake all night, and I didn't. I was so tired, I fell asleep right away. And then this happened. It was all my fault." Feeling thoroughly miserable, I turned my head away, and then I saw them, all the guests of Chateau Bow Wow. Their noses pressed against the fronts of their bungalows were watching me. Their silent vigil reminded me of the scene the night before. I saw in their eyes the same look I'd seen when they'd stared at Chester, accusing him wordlessly of what? Of knowing too much, I realized. Yes, Chester had paid the price for his curiosity, for his big mouth. The sounds of Jill's renewed crying within the office shook me from my thoughts. Maybe Chester is sick, I thought, and they've taken him indoors. I decided to find out what I could by listening at the office window. As I crossed the compound, I thought of our eavesdropping on Max and Georgette yesterday, and a smile came to my lips. It was funny thinking of Chester's tail tickling my nose, of our falling into the mud puddle, of his saying to me, and then I felt a lump in my throat, and I thought no more about it. Placing my paws on the windowsill and standing on my back legs, I was able to see inside. Harrison, his back to me, stood by the examining table. Jill sat in an old beat-up chair next to him. She kept dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Chester, I observed, was nowhere in sight. I strained to hear as best I could. "I can't believe it," Jill was saying. "I just can't believe it." "Neither can I," Harrison replied, "but it's the only explanation." How did it happen? Jill asked. That's what I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. Sometimes life is like that, Harrison said. Sometimes life just doesn't make sense. We're not talking about life, Harrison. We're talking about... Yes, I know. Jill stopped crying and heaved a huge sigh. After a moment of silence between them, she looked up at Harrison. It's all my fault. You know, I did it. Of course you didn't, Jill, Harrison answered calmly. You've got to stop talking like that. These things happen, that's all. It could have happened to anyone. Look, I make mistakes too. You know that. Maybe, but I was the one who cleaned out that part of the storage shed. I remember carrying that stuff out to the street for pickup. I just don't understand how it got inside the compound. Well, Harrison said. Jill looked up at him. What? She asked. Nothing, Harrison answered quickly. His eyes flitted nervously from side to side. What were you going to say? Nothing, really. I just... Harrison. Never mind, I don't want to upset you. I'm already upset. Tell me what you were going to say. Okay, if you insist. I was just remembering that when you came inside the compound, you were carrying that bag of garbage. When Louise was barking, yes, said Jill, with a worried look, and the bag broke. That's how it got there. They both fell silent. Harrison? Jill said. Yes. May I take the rest of the day off? Harrison paused uncertainly. Then he said, Of course you can. Why not? Maybe the rest will do you good. Yes, was all Jill said in response. And then she stood. She took off her smock and started toward the door to the front of the building. Turning back to look at Harrison, I could see her face clearly now and had to duck down so she wouldn't see me. She said, How could it have gotten into Chester's food? Just tell me that. This was the first I'd heard Chester's name, and I felt my stomach tighten. How could what have gotten into Chester's food? I listened carefully. I don't know, Harrison replied. All I know is that I found the container near his bungalow, and when I tested his food, poison. Poison? Poison. The word went through me like an arrow. Jill spoke again. And now he's gone. Yes, Harrison said. May I see him? Jill asked. Harrison stepped toward her. He put his arms out to take her by the shoulders. Why upset yourself any more? I'll take care of everything. And Dr. Gardenbrier? I'll call him, don't worry. Just go home and rest. What happened then, I don't know. I dropped down from the windowsill, no longer caring about anything more I might hear or see. I heard quite enough. Slowly, I stumbled back to my bungalow. Everyone may have been watching me still, but I have no recollection of anything except the lump in my throat growing larger with every step. And the thought that my best friend in the world was gone, poisoned, and all because he knew too much. Back inside my bungalow, I curled up as tight as I could and fell into a deep sleep. Harold X, The Private Eye, Chapter 8. I awakened to the sound of cloth being torn. From the low growls that followed, I surmised that a game of Rip the Rag was in progress. Slowly, I opened my eyes and stared out into the bright sunlight. At last, the storm had passed, and from the sight of animals at play before me, it appeared that all was well with the world. Max, Georgette, and Taxi tugged at what looked like an old towel. Heather sat sunning herself, while Howard dug at the earth in the far corner of the compound. Lyle was wrapped around a ball of some kind, kicking it with his hind feet. The scene was so inviting that for one brief moment I wanted to run outside and join in the play. And then I remembered Chester. My heart sank. And the thought occurred to me, someone out there, some seemingly innocent frolicker, was really a cold-blooded killer. How could I play with a murderer? I asked myself. And who could it be? Who could it be? I cast my eye over each in turn. Georgette let go of the towel and merrily darted back and forth, nipped at Max's ankles. Sure, I thought, she has reason to be happy. With Louise out of the picture, she's got Max all to herself now. He didn't seem so miserable either, I noticed. How quickly his grief had spent itself. Well, why not? After all, if he had bumped Louise off, no one but Chester knew. A little poison in Chester's food, and there was no more need to pretend. Soon he and Georgette would run away together. Everything was going according to plan. Why shouldn't he be happy? And Taxi? I watched as he collided with Max's shoulder. He fell back onto the grass and rolled around, scratching his back. Max ran off with the rag, waving it in the air. Suddenly, Taxi lurched to his feet and, picking up the challenge, grabbed one end of the rag from Max. They tugged in opposite directions. How pleased Taxi must be, I thought, if he were the culprit. After all, he'd wanted so badly to impress Max, to be his best friend, and now it appeared he had given Max everything he could ask for, and more. And in return, he'd gotten everything he'd wanted, too. It was not easy to forget Taxi's interest in murder by poison. How excited he'd been when he first mentioned it to Max and me. No, he might appear on the surface to be a little dumb, but Taxi was no dumb dog. The sound of scratching drew my eyes to Howard. What was he doing anyway? He seemed to be digging a hole, to bury a bone, I thought, or perhaps something else. He kept looking over his shoulders, as if he were afraid of being caught. My glance fell on Heather. How strange the two of them were. Perhaps Chester had been right. Maybe they were werewolves. I vowed to keep my eye on them. Suddenly, Lyle sprang up and attacked a leaf that happened to blow by in the passing breeze. "Gotcha, you little one," he cried. "You thought you could escape the long arm of the law, eh? Well, take that and that." And he beat the poor leaf into a fine powder. He was an oddball, no question about it. I remembered his threat to Louise, and then his words from the night before popped into my head. "Let's string 'em up," he had exclaimed as he ran off. Lyle was just crazy enough, I concluded, to carry out his threat. Murder would be as natural to him as playing with a ball of yarn was to most cats. Just then the door to the office opened and Harrison stepped out, coming in my direction. "Hey, Harold," he called out cheerily. "It's about time you were up. You going to sleep all day?" "Woof," I answered. "Oh, yeah? What kind of a thing is that to say?" Frankly, I wasn't sure myself what I meant by it. He opened my door. "Come on," he said. "It's almost time for dinner. How about getting a little exercise?" Leaving my bungalow, I observed Harrison out of the corner of my eye. He was whistling now. His cheeks were puffed out and red from the forced with which he blew the melody, such as it was, through his lips. Gee, he seems happy, I thought. There was a twinkle in his eye as he patted my head and said, "Good boy, Harold." From anybody else, such good cheer would have been normal behavior. From Harrison, it was definitely suspectful. What if he's the one, I thought. Maybe he's in cahoots with Dr. Greenbrier, as Chester once suspected. Maybe they're doing some kind of awful experiment in their laboratory. And a shudder went through me as I thought of poor Louise and Chester in the lab of a mad doctor. I didn't let myself think about it any longer. Harrison went back inside, and I surveyed the scene before me. Georgette and Max had gone off by themselves, and Taxi was rolling on the ground, playing along with the remains of the towel. It was at that moment I decided to take matters into my own paws. I remembered something Chester had once said to me when I refused to go along with him to investigate another of his little hunches. I'd promised him I'd stay home and think about it. Sure, he said. You may think about it, Harold, but I'm the one who will do something about it. What do you mean by that? I asked. Cats are doers. Dogs are not. That's what I mean. I think you may be overstating your case. Think what you will, he said as he walked away. The fact is that I am the one who's trying to do something, while you, oh passive pooch, wrap yourself around your food dish and do nothing. Once more I felt the sting of Chester's accusation. Do nothing, I thought. I'll show him he's not the only one with a brain. And so, with gritted teeth and a sense of great determination, I set out to unearth the truth. I decided to start with Taxi, and I figured I'd catch him off guard with a direct assault. What do you know, Taxi? I asked. Taxi looked at me blankly. Perhaps that had been the wrong approach. I tried again. How are you, Taxi? Oh, hello, Harold, Taxi said, as if seeing me for the first time. Some storm we've been having, eh? I asked. Oh, I'm all right, I guess. What? Fine, thanks. There was a pause as Taxi and I looked at each other. You asked how I am, and I'm telling you I'm fine. Oh, yes, I see. How are you? I'm okay, I guess. You're welcome. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to say thank you. For what? For asking how you are. Oh, I said, I'm sorry. That's all right. Thank you. You're welcome. I looked at Taxi a long time. Suddenly, I couldn't remember what I had wanted to ask him. Or why. Knowing Taxi, I decided, was definitely one of life's more confusing experiences. You're probably wondering how I got the name Taxi. He mumbled so softly that at first I thought he was talking to himself. Well, no, I wasn't really. Then I'll tell you, Harold. Thank you, I said, wondering when the dinner bell would ring. You see, I was owned by these people in New York City who thought that when they took me out for a walk, it would be cute to call Taxi. People who live in New York City think things like that are cute. It's the air pollution that does it to them, I think. Anyway, for a long time, whenever they called Taxi, I thought they were really calling a taxi, so I wouldn't come. And the taxi drivers thought they were calling a taxi too, so they'd pull up. So all the time they were getting all these taxis they didn't want, and taxi drivers were getting really mad at them. And meanwhile, I was wandering off down the street because I didn't know they were calling me. What happened? I asked. Oh, eventually I figured out that Taxi was my name, but by then I think they'd gotten bored with the whole thing. They bought roller skates and gave me to their cousin who lives in town here. Air pollution is a terrible thing, I commented. Taxi murmured as he rolled over on his back. Just then, I remember why I'd started this conversation in the first place. Interesting, I thought, how neatly he'd gotten me off track. Taxi, I want to ask you something. Oh, hello, Harold. Where were you on the night of, last night? I asked. Huh? Your whereabouts last night, Taxi. My what, Harold? Your whereabouts. Taxi looked up at me as if his brain had just gone out to lunch. Where were you last night? Oh, why didn't you say so? He paused for a moment. Now I had him. I could feel it. In my bungalow, of course, just like everyone else. Why do you ask? Oh, he was a slippery thing. But I wasn't going to be fooled so easily. I thought how proud Chester would have been at my investigatory skills. The truth now, Taxi. Tell me the truth. Okay, he said. That's better. I was in my bungalow. You said that already. I know. Why are you telling me the same story? Because it's true, and you asked me to tell you the truth, didn't you, Harold? Yes, I did. I could feel myself beginning to falter. I'm sorry about Chester, Taxi said then in a voice full of sympathy. Me too, I said. Want to play Rip the Rag? He offered. Downhearted, I began to walk away. No thanks, I called back over my shoulder. Maybe another time. Okay, bye, Harold. And he returned to his tug of war with himself. Not feeling particularly encouraged by the results of my investigation thus far, I was almost ready to give up and go home when I saw that Howard had stopped digging and was now sitting next to Heather in front of their adjoining bungalows. As I approached, I watched their heads move up and down and couldn't help thinking how terrific they'd look on the back window ledge of an old Chevy. Good afternoon, I said. They stopped talking immediately and stared at me as if they'd been caught chewing on a leg of the dining room table. Neither one of them said a word. I cleared my throat. Good afternoon, I repeated. They glanced into each other's eyes. No one spoke for what felt like a very long time. In a tiny voice, Howard finally said, Good afternoon. There was a pause. I decided to plunge in. Where were you last night? I asked. Not much in the mood for conversation at the moment, Harold, old chap. Frightfully sorry. It's just that we're... Now, Heather interjected crisply, cutting Howard off from saying another word. I had no choice but to plunge right back out again. Well, another time perhaps, I said. Yes, Howard said with a crooked little smile. Another time, Heather firmly said. And then, just to make certain I got the message, she added, Goodbye, Harold. Goodbye, I said, walking away and muttering under my breath. It was nice talking with you. Fortunately, I had no time to brood further over my lack of success, for I saw that Max and Georgette were coming toward me. I felt a little nervous. After all, they were prime suspects. I considered how best to approach them. Clearly, they were too smart not to recognize a direct attack. No, with them, I reasoned, I would have to be subtle. I would work my way into it slowly, craftily, never letting them suspect what I was up to. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I asked casually. "Oh, yes," replied Georgette. She smiled sweetly. "Right you are, Harold," Max added. "Well, speaking of what a beautiful day it is, last night certainly wasn't. So where were you?" I was extremely impressed with myself. If only Chester could have been there, I thought, to see just how clever and subtle I could be when I put my mind to it. "What?" Max asked, pretending to be confused. I heard the dinner bell ring and saw Harrison making his rounds. Drat! What a time to be disrupted by food, just when I had them on the ropes. I'd forgotten exactly what we were talking about, but I didn't let that stand in my way. "A likely story," I snapped. Georgette looked concerned. "Harold, do you think maybe you've been out in the sun too long?" she said. An interesting ploy, I thought, trying to make me look like the suspicious one. "Harold, pal," Max said gruffly, "it's been terrific chewing the fat with you, but we've got to run. Chow time. You know what I mean?" I do indeed, I thought. Any excuse to get away, huh? "Think about what I've said," I told Max and Georgette as they started to go. I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. "You know where you can reach me if you have anything you need to get off your chest." Max gave me a puzzled look, just to keep me thinking he was innocent, no doubt. "Sure, mate," he uttered. "Oh, Harold," Georgette said then, "there is something." "Yes?" "Ah, confession at last. We're sorry about Chester." "I'll bet you are," I thought. "Just like you were sorry about Louise, but thanks," was all I said. "Hey, Harold, let's go," Harrison called out. "Soup's on." As long as it isn't split pea, I thought. After checking my dinner out for any uninvited smells or tastes, I plunged in. I was starved, which was understandable considering the amount of energy I'd used up conducting a tough, unyielding criminal investigation. The only thing that bothered me about it was that I'd unearthed no new evidence. What I had unearthed was doubt. Doubt in my own mind that anyone at Chateau Bow Wow was the culprit, or indeed that a crime had taken place. Perhaps Chester had made the whole thing up in his twisted imagination. It was possible, after all, that Louise had run away, just as everyone had said. And it may have been just an accident that led to Chester's poisoning. Perhaps all of it, I reasoned, was the unfortunate result of Jill's carelessness. It was then that I noticed the writing on the bottom of my dish. The letters were smudged so that it was hard to make out what it said at first. Boy, I thought, the least they could do is serve dinner in bowls you can read. I was definitely going to complain about the service. I strained my eyes and looked into the depths of my bowl. The last word was now. I had no trouble reading it because it was the only one that wasn't marked up. After a moment's consideration, I could see that the first word was hello. The end of that word was messy, but hello it was. Of that I was certain. Because of all the black marks, the three words in the middle were harder to decipher. But having hung out around Toby when he did crossword puzzles on the living room floor, I was pretty good at working my way around black marks. So finally I was able to figure it out. With a great sense of accomplishment, I uttered my findings out loud. "Hello, how's your tummy now?" "Fine, thank you," I replied silently, although my eyes are a little out of focus. I went into the water dish, thinking what a cute thing that had been for a food dish to say. Too bad it had been so hard to read, though. I thought of what a time I'd had trying to make out the word tummy. It was almost as if someone had tried to cross it out deliberately. Suddenly, my ears went up. I lifted my head from the water dish. What if, I asked myself, what if someone had tried to cross it out? Again, I studied the bottom of my food dish, but this time with a new intent. How could I have missed it? This wasn't an old, worn-out bowl, and there weren't random smudges. Someone was trying to tell me something. Looking at it in this way, I saw a new message. Hello became help. House became howls. The third word was a little harder to make clear, but I finally read it out as out. Tummy had been smudged out entirely and now was left as it was. Hello, how's your tummy now became help, howls, out, now. The sky was getting cloudy. A low rumble of thunder made it clear that the day's sunshine had been only a brief respite from the storm. Help howls out now, I thought, as I lay down to sleep. Help howls out now. What did it mean?